Welcome to State of the World with me, Sally Lockwood, in London, back in Dubai next week.
And me, Tara Palmeri, in New York, just coming back from a trip to Washington, D.C. for some reporting on the ground. What a day, Sal. What a week.
I
Um,
know.
Feels like a lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, it's big, isn't it? Obviously, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to be talking about Iran today because of the major news there, Israel attacking nuclear facilities in Iran and killing some of its most senior officials. Absolutely huge news and pretty significant, if not dangerous, moment for the Middle East, Tara. What's been the reaction in the US?
I think everyone's sort of like looking to President Trump, right? Because this was something that he said would not happen under his watch, right? He said, elect me. And on day one, all of these world wars will be over, right? I'll solve the war in Ukraine. I'll end the crisis in the Middle East. And here we have an escalation in the Middle East. We have an escalation in Ukraine and Russia every single day. It seems like the tension points are just boiling over and over and over again. And he was saying this is a feature of weak leadership in the Biden administration. But it turns out that he can't really control his friend Bibi Netanyahu in Israel. And this is in the middle of their negotiating with Iran, the Iran deal, although everyone sort of believes that this was always a wink and a nod and Trump was okay with what Israel was doing, knowing all along while they were talking to Iran that really they were fine with this escalation from Israel. And this was always happening in the backdrop. So for us in the US who pay very close attention to everything that President Trump does, I mean, he was not quick to truth out or send out, his tweets as he does about this. He let the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, make a comment first, and then he stepped in and made some comments about it. But it just shows that he's trying to create some distance. The people who voted for him, the MAGA faithful, they're isolationists, they're America first. They don't like these foreign wars. They were hoping that he would end all of the conflict. It's getting worse. But I think, you know, I think that at some point, though, he's going to have to really address it more clearly and what he thinks about it. I mean, they've obviously the Americans were always briefed and aware of what Israel was about to do while they were simultaneously negotiating with Iran, but it's creating a whole new crisis right now for them. What is the take on your side of the world?
I mean, it's huge news. And obviously, my side of the world would normally be the Middle East. So I'm really annoyed with myself that I'm not there. But I mean, this has been bubbling away for some time. There's been a lot of concern about Iran's nuclear program, about its uranium enrichment. The fact that the International Atomic Energy Agency has expressed concern that Iran has so much more enriched uranium than they realized. And, the concern that it actually potentially wouldn't take Iran that long if they did want
Mm,
to make a nuclear bomb. There was very much a lot of regional concern. And, we're going to get into the regional reaction with our guest, who is going to join in a few minutes, because he will definitely be able to talk the real detail of this. It's Gregg Carlstrom again, friend of the show, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. We'll bring him in when he joins in a moment. But it's been very quickly condemned by Saudi Arabia, this attack by Israel on
mm.
Iran. That said, I don't think there will be that many countries who will be that upset about it. Iran doesn't
Right.
have a huge number of friends in the region. And interestingly, Hezbollah, who are backed by Iran, have already come out and said that they are not going to react, which is quite a significant win for Israel. But I think it does feel like a major escalation. And it's been really interesting that Marco Rubio and Donald Trump have made it very clear that this was unilateral action by
Right.
Israel. America was not involved. That said, they certainly knew about it. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought that Donald Trump's statement on Truth Social was really interesting. He's warned that the next wave of attacks against Iran would be even more brutal, I think were his words, Tara, right?
Yeah, well, let's not forget that Iran has put a death wish on Trump. They've followed up with death threats. He is, obviously direct. They've directly threatened the president's life. Actually, when I was covering the campaign, the Trump campaign, there was a hack. The Iranians were hacking the accounts of the campaign Donald Trump's lawyers, and some of reporters that they thought were influential and had access to top officials on his campaign. And I happened to be one of them. I wasn't actually hacked. It was a phishing attempt. They tried to phish and get into my account. But they
Wow.
did. Yeah, but they did actually give me some documents from Trump's legal team. They hacked his lawyers and they tried to give them to me under a disguise. I'm blanking on the name of the person, but they didn't say obviously they were the Iranians, but they had some really sensitive legal documents, stories that had never been told about deals that Trump was trying to make with
Wow.
people ahead of the campaign, another type of hush money uh, deal
And
that Trump was trying to make with
how did you
Stormy
know it was
Daniels.
Iran?
Well, as I was about to go and publish, right? Washington Post puts out a story saying Iranians have tried to attack um, the accounts of the Trump campaign, and they've actually breached their accounts, and they've breached the lawyers, and they gave the name of the person that under the disguise, the person who's reaching out to journalists, the person who's reaching out to these officials to get them to sort of interact with them and be able to breach their accounts. And it was the same person who reached out to me, and the FBI put out a statement. I contacted the FBI, and obviously complied. I didn't report it, the document that I had, even though it was very juicy. It wasn't anything either that I thought would change the state of the race, but I also felt like it was stolen material from the Ayatollah. And it wasn't going to change the state of the race, where it wasn't necessarily in the public interest to the point where I was like, okay, what do I do with this stolen information, which is always sort of that moral question we always have as journalists, what to do with it. But it was really fascinating. They had a target on him the entire election. There was massive security around him, for fears that the Iranians were trying to kill him the entire time, and they certainly tried to take down his campaign. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine there's much love there.
I think that's something we don't hear about enough, actually, Tara, was those assassination reports, that were circulating that the
Mhm.
Iranians were going to attempt some sort of assassination on Donald Trump. Tell us what you learned about that.
I mean, it's always been a thing that's circulating. I mean, he took out some of their top leaders. They were obsessed with him. I think they believed that this would happen if he was president, that he would, wink, wink, nod, nod to Israel. He would allow this sort of escalation. Maybe they didn't think that was going to happen under the Kamala Harris years or Biden years. So that perhaps that was part of it as well. They certainly did not have the same stance towards the existing administration before that. I just think it's interesting because President Trump has not been able to de-escalate these situations at all. I mean, the incursion in Israel has ramped up. Clearly, they feel like they're winning, or they wouldn't be going after Iran right now. I mean, wouldn't you agree with that? Um,
Or that the timing's good because Iran is weakened at the moment because
right.
they've weakened Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Uh huh.
They've attacked the Houthis in Yemen significantly, who've also been weakened, both backed by Iran. So potentially, obviously Donald Trump has big domestic issues he's dealing with at home, like the LA riots. It perhaps just felt like the right time for Israel to
Right.
attack rather than the fact that they were emboldened. I think
Mhm.
perhaps it was more that Iran appeared weakened and it was an opportune moment to strike. This is Gregg Carlstrom, Middle East correspondent for The Economist. Hey, Greg, how are you? Good to see you.
It's been a very relaxing day over here. Not much going on at all.
Yeah, casual.
I mean,
Easy
I
breezy.
sent you a
Exactly.
text when I woke up a few hours ago, and yeah, I know your reaction was like, "Oh, really? Is something happening?"
You're in
it's
Riyadh, right?
We all thought we had until Sunday. I mean, we all thought something was coming, but we at least
Yeah.
had until the next round of talks on Sunday. So, totally a surprise.
Okay, great. Because actually, that was going to be one of my questions. I mean, it seemed hardly anyone saw this coming this fast, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. This has come as a real surprise. We got a slight warning that US staff were being pulled out of Iraq, but then less than 24 hours later, Israel strikes Iran. I mean, that was a shock.
It was. I mean, if you had asked me a week ago, I would have said, September, October, that was when the deadline was coming for some sort of Either there was going to be a strike or a deal. And then if you had asked me 2 days ago, I would have said we have at least until Sunday, Monday, because the Trump administration was insisting there were going to be more talks with Iran on Sunday. So I think just about everyone was shocked to wake up to this news this morning.
And just for context, Greg, you're in the Middle East, you specialize in the Middle East. Just what a explain just how much of a critical and dangerous moment this is for the region.
I think for Iran itself, this is the most vulnerable they have been since the 1980s, since the early days of the Islamic Republic, sort of immediately after the revolution, when they were fighting what would become a very long war against Saddam Hussein's Iraq. They haven't been that vulnerable in almost half a century. And then I think for the wider region, I mean, there have been a lot of people sort of warning today, diplomats issuing these dramatic statements about how we have to pull back from the brink of all out war. I think arguably we've been there for about 20 months now. We've had a multi front war across the region since October 7th. But there is a risk of that now escalating. You think about, Iran, will they lash out at American military bases? Will they lash out at energy infrastructure in the Gulf and try to blow up, oil fields in Saudi Arabia? Will they try to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, through which a lot of oil is traded? So there's a risk that what was already a very bad war in the region might sort of jump to a whole new level right now.
How effective do you think these strikes were? I mean, we saw that a bunch of military leaders were killed, but they were able to strike some of the, plants where they were trying to build these bombs, or at least had some uranium, some government buildings. But I mean, how how effective do you think they were?
I think let's put the strikes in almost three baskets. You have the strikes on leaders, on military
Hmm.
leaders in Iran, which have been remarkably successful. The head of the Revolutionary Guard was killed. The army chief of staff, security advisor to the supreme leader of Iran, the top missile official in the Revolutionary Guard, one by one through anyone who is everyone who is anyone in the Iranian security apparatus has been killed. So it really has decapitated the top of Iran's military leadership.
Mm.
The second set of strikes are those aimed at either Iran's ability to defend itself or to retaliate. So strikes against air defenses, against ballistic missile infrastructure, which Iran could use to launch missiles at Israel, things like that. It seems as if Israel has done a significant amount of damage there. Iran hasn't really been able either to defend or to retaliate in a big way. It's launched some drones at Israel, but not the sort of hundreds of ballistic missile barrages that we saw twice last year. The third, and sort of the focus of this, of course, the third basket is the strikes on nuclear facilities. And there, as far as we know, Israel has only hit one of the main nuclear sites at Natanz, the uranium enrichment facility at Natanz. We don't know the extent of the damage there. And then some of the other big parts of Iran's nuclear program, the enrichment site in Fordo, the uranium processing plant in Isfahan, those have not been hit yet, according to the UN's nuclear agency.
And what we don't know yet, Greg, is the extent of how Iran is going to react. And it certainly sounds like the Israeli strikes on Iran aren't over yet either.
The Israelis are talking about this as a weeks long campaign. They're saying this will go on for at least 2 weeks, presumably, unless Donald Trump decides he wants to pull the plug. The Iranians, again, so far we've just seen a couple of volleys of very slow moving drones, which the Israelis have been able to shoot down before they even reach Israeli territory. They take hours to get there. So, not a very effective response. I think as Iran is probably thinking through other things that it might do, one thing is to fire ballistic missiles at Israel, which can get there in a matter of minutes rather than hours. But to do that, it needs to be able to access its ballistic missiles, get them onto launchers, fire them. And again, it seems as if there's been some damage to its missile infrastructure. Another thing that it would have done, before last year, was rely on its partners in the region, militias in the region, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like Hamas in Gaza. But obviously, they have been battered by war against Israel over the past 20 months. So, what we've heard from Hezbollah so far, condemnation of the Israeli strikes on Iran. They put out a statement that said, we stand with you, Iran, but they're not talking about any military action against Israel. That would be very unpopular in Lebanon right now. So it seems as if they might sit this one out. So then the question is, does Iran decide to widen this conflict? Do they attack, again, the Gulf states, hoping that the Saudis, the Emiratis, rulers like that, who are very close to Donald Trump, might start pressuring him to restrain the Israelis? If you attack energy infrastructure, that means oil prices will jump. That also might put pressure on Trump, who doesn't want to see gas prices go up. So the Iranians have to decide whether they want to do that, knowing that if they do that, they risk the opposite happening. They risk America actually getting involved directly in this war, which would then obviously amplify the threat to the Iranian regime.
And do you really see that happening, Greg? Do you see Iran potentially carrying out a strike on Saudi or on the Emirates where we live?
It's a huge, huge risk. I mean, they have threatened to do it in the past, and they have done it in the past, actually. In 2019, Iranian missiles and drones hit a Saudi oil facility. They briefly knocked out 50% of Saudi Arabia's oil production, like 5% of global oil production. So they have done it before, but to do it now, I think it's sort of a break glass option for the regime. If they do it, they are forever poisoning their relationships with their neighbors who have really been trying over the past few years to improve their relationships with Iran. And again, there's this risk that if they do it, America will get involved directly, that America won't sort of be spooked by that and then pressure the Israelis to stop, that America might actually get involved in this war.
And speaking of that, I actually heard from a source in Iraq, an Iraqi source, that Iranian backed militias in Iraq are already mobilizing in an attempt to target US assets in the country. If that were to happen, what would be the reaction from America?
Well, I think go back to 2020, go back 5 years now, when Donald Trump was in office in his first term. There were protests outside the US Embassy in Baghdad. The embassy was sort of put under siege briefly by militia groups in Iraq. And that was, by all accounts, the trigger for Donald Trump deciding to assassinate Qasem Soleimani, who was sort of the most storied, celebrated, important Iranian general. So Trump does have a history on occasion of responding to these things with force. And I think again, there's a really big risk here for the Iranians that if they do something like that, that Trump is not going to back down, that Trump is going to do the opposite.
What do you make of the fact that the embassies, the US embassies, were just evacuated last night, like the one in Iraq and Afghanistan? Or was it just Iraq, I believe, right,
Yeah.
Sal?
Then they
Just
don't have
Iraq.
an embassy in Afghanistan at the moment. It's in
Right.
Doha.
Okay, right. So what do you make of the fact that the one in Iraq was just evacuated last night? Seems like they weren't
You
really
know, we
aware
were
of the timing.
we were all trying to figure that out as this announcement was coming out. The embassy in Iraq, and then also families in Bahrain and Kuwait, dependents of American diplomats and American military personnel, were also allowed to evacuate from those two countries. And we were all trying to figure out, was this a feint? Was this a sort of a PR stunt to put more pressure on the Iranians ahead of these talks that we expected to happen on Sunday? Or was it a sign that America knew something was coming, knew an attack was coming, and was starting to draw down its personnel? And obviously, it turns out to be the latter. What Trump has said in the hours after this Israeli attack, and he sort of changes his story every time depending on who he's
Mm.
talking to. He's done a series of interviews throughout the day, but I think he's made it pretty clear that he knew in advance, certainly about the timing of the Israeli attack, about the Israeli plan. It seems as if he approved it, and they're almost using this as a he's almost doing a good cop, bad cop routine with Netanyahu right now, with the Israeli prime minister, where
Mm.
Israel is attacking Iran. Trump is saying, if you thought that was bad, the next round is going to be even worse. And the only way you stop this is by coming back to the table to negotiate a deal with me. So it looks like it's almost a coordinated strategy. And then it looks like these drawdowns of the embassies ahead of time were obviously in anticipation of what Trump knew was going to be a military strike.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was actually just talking to a friend from the Wall Street Journal who was able to get through to Trump this morning, and she asked him about this, what they knew, and he was like, "Of course I knew what was happening the entire time, right?" So it almost makes you think he was giving, them a wink, wink, nod, nod while negotiating with Iran on the deal in bad faith because they were supposed to have a talk on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, and it's sort of remarkable that Trump has the time to do this series of interviews this morning with a
I
war
know, right?
breaking out in the Middle East, but
I mean, we could call him
he
right now.
is,
Maybe
yeah.
we'll get him on the line.
It's worth the try, honestly. Yeah, he had given Iran a deadline back in March. He said
Mm.
Iran had 2 months to make a deal, a nuclear deal with the US. And he started that clock on April 12th, which was the first day that Steve Witkoff, his Middle East envoy, met with his Iranian counterpart in Oman. Yesterday was the expiration. Yesterday was 2 months. So the deadline came. No one expected Trump was going to enforce that deadline. We thought it was going to be like the deadline he gave Russia to reach a ceasefire in Ukraine, which came and went. We thought that there was going to be at least another round of talks, and that, as long as the Iranians seemed engaged with negotiations, Trump was going to give it some more time, and clearly that was not the plan.
What about the fact that we, replenish the Iron Dome? Do you think that sort of emboldened Israel?
Well, the thing is with Iron Dome, it's not
Mhm.
actually that useful for what they're dealing with right now.
Okay.
Iron Dome, it's designed for the kinds of short range rockets that Hamas would have fired from Gaza, some of the rockets that Hezbollah would have fired from Lebanon. The threats that it faces from Iran, particularly the ballistic missiles, those they fly a lot higher, a lot faster than the short
Mm.
range rockets. And so there's a different aerial defense system that Israel uses for those. And there's a real concern that if Iran were to start firing, it's probably got about 2,000 missiles with the range to hit Israel. If it were to start firing a significant number of those, Israel might to start run out of to run out of these interceptors, which are expensive and in relatively short supply. So that's one question going forward: is can Israel do enough damage to Iran's launch facilities before it launches these missiles?
Mm.
Because it won't be able to fend off all of them after they're launched.
And what do you think this means for the talks between the US and Iran? I thought it was really interesting that Donald Trump is still asking Iran to come back to the negotiating table on the day that they've been attacked by Israel. I mean, you could call that, optimistic thinking, or you could just call it, for the birds, right? Do you think that is something that is going to happen?
No, I don't. I mean, it really was remarkable. I think there were still Israeli strikes going on in Iran, and there was an unnamed American official briefing that the U.S. was still planning to show up on Sunday for these negotiations, as if anyone from Iran was even going to be able to get out of the country, let alone willing to show up.
I would cancel
No,
your
I think
hotel. So I think you can safely cancel your hotel.
very
I don't know if
much,
I'm getting
yeah.
ahead of myself, but is there any chance there'll be a regime change over this?
It's really much too early to
Okay.
predict. I mean, I think you look at what Israel is doing, and I don't think the goal of this is just to damage Iran's nuclear facilities. I think the goal of this really is to destabilize the regime, knocking out the entire top layer of military officials and then publicizing it, right? The Israelis have been releasing videos of not only the strikes, but they're saying they set up a forward operating base inside of Iran where they were launching drones from, and they've been releasing videos of Mossad agents inside of Iran,
Mm.
targeting air defenses and other things. Usually, when Israel does these sorts of things, they don't publicize it, right? They want some degree of deniability, and they don't want to humiliate the enemy. They're being very, very public about this in a way that I think is designed to undermine confidence in the regime, to try and destabilize the Iranian regime at home. Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to target the supreme leader. It doesn't mean that they're going to target the president and do that sort of explicit regime change. But do I think they're trying to create enough instability that maybe there's a coup, or maybe there's some other change of power inside of Iran? I think that is a possibility.
What happens now, Greg? I mean, Iran doesn't respond well to this sort of thing. They're going to double down, aren't they? And in terms of what this means for the Middle East. Other countries are already feeling this. Jordan had air raid sirens today.
I think a lot of it depends on how far Iran wants to go with it and how far Iran can go with its retaliation. If it starts striking Gulf states, then that changes the dynamic here. Then there's a lot of pressure on the United States either to end the war or to get involved in the war and defend the Saudis, defend the Emiratis. If Iran kills any Americans, if it attacks, the U.S. embassy in Baghdad or American bases in the region, obviously then it will draw the United States directly into the conflict. If Iran doesn't do those things, if it keeps its retaliation mostly focused on Israel, on missile and drone attacks against Israel, then this can probably keep going on for days, if not for weeks. And then it comes down to what does Israel want to achieve here? How far do they want to go? How far are they willing to go? How long can they sustain this sort of operation? It's difficult, right? Having to fly planes 1,000 miles to Iran, refuel them in the air. It's a very grueling operational tempo for the Israeli Air Force. So, how long can they keep it up for? We don't know. They've never done anything like this before. So, we really don't have a precedent that we can point to.
Yeah, President Trump just got off the phone with ABC News, and he said, "I think that the attack has been excellent. We gave them a chance, and they didn't take it. They got hit hard, very hard. They got hit about as hard as you're going to get hit, and there's more to come, a lot more." That's what Trump says. So a lot more to come. What do you make of that, Greg?
So good cop, bad cop. Again, here's your way out. If you want to avoid that more, whatever that more is, let's make a deal. Essentially, it's surrender or collapse. That is the proposition that they are putting
Mm,
to the Iranian regime here. Either you concede on some of the points that you've never been willing to concede on before, things like whether a nuclear deal will let you keep enriching uranium. Concede on that, make a deal on our terms, or we let the Israelis keep doing this, and we see what happens to the stability of your regime.
exactly. And you know what? I just want to be clear about this. He was asked whether there would be American participation in the strikes, and he said, "I don't want to comment on that." So, that's something to consider.
That's not a no.
It's not a no, and there is always that possibility, right? If the Iranian response is forceful enough, if Iran is intransigent enough, and at some point Donald Trump gets frustrated with this and decides, hey, it looks like it's going well, why not get involved? I mean, I think a lot of people convinced themselves in recent months that Trump was sort of fundamentally this hawk who wanted to end the wars in the region and didn't want
Right.
to get involved in conflicts in the region. That was certainly how he sounded a few weeks ago when he came to the region. But listening to him this morning, at least for now, while this seems to be going well from an Israeli perspective, from an American perspective, Trump seems on board with it. Now, if
Well,
it starts going badly, he might change his mind.
right. And just to be clear too, Iran claimed this morning that the damage at their enrichment plant was just at a surface level. I don't know if you can actually believe that, but they're obviously downplaying it right now for the reasons that you probably made, right? About trying to create the impression that the regime is still strong.
But also, I think there's the concern about leakage, right, Greg? Because these are nuclear facilities.
They're deep underground, these facilities. So
Mm,
yeah, in some cases, it's very hard to reach them with a bomb, particularly for the Israelis. The U.S. has bigger bombs that can penetrate further underground. Israel doesn't have the capability to use those bombs. But even if you do surface level damage to some of these underground facilities, if you blow up all the ventilation shafts, for example, that go underground, you make it impossible to use these facilities. You can do damage that way. So even if it's surface level damage, that doesn't mean that they're not, knocked out of service for potentially a long period of time.
And
hmm.
just while we've got you, Greg, given you're such an expert on the region, I just want to ask you if you could just cast your mind back 20 months to when Hamas attacked Israel on October the 7th. Could you have ever imagined that the region would now be at this point?
No one did. I mean, certainly, I think Yahya Sinwar, who was the leader of Hamas in Gaza at the time, the one who approved the October 7th massacre, I don't think he would have anticipated that it would result in Gaza being destroyed and the leader of Hezbollah being killed and now Iran being directly attacked. The whole sort of axis of resistance, the whole Iranian backed axis in the region, has been smashed in a way that no one would have expected. And no one thought the war would still be going on. I mean, I always go back to a couple of weeks after October 7th, sitting with an Israeli general who was planning the war, who said, you know, we think by about Christmas, the Americans are going to tell us to wrap this up because they won't want this dragging into 2024 and hanging over the election campaign and so on and so forth. And here we are 20 months later. It's still going on. No one has told them to wrap it up, and it's expanded to Iran.
And it feels so unpredictable right now. It's hard to know where we're going to be in a week's time, let alone a month's time. But I know that we're going to be talking to you about it again, Greg. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you cancel any holidays. I think you're going to be busy. And thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Do it again soon, hopefully.
Well, that was another fascinating chat with Greg. And definitely, this story has a long way to go, Tara.
I know, and you have to go back to the region. Thinking of you, and I hope it doesn't escalate to the point where you're personally impacted. But keep me posted all week.
Honestly, I can't imagine it. I mean, if it starts, impacting countries like the Emirates, I think it will be, a very, very different world that we're living in. So let's see, but certainly I can't wait to get back to Dubai and feel like I'm in amongst it and back in the region, with my finger on
Yeah.
the pulse. It's been great being here in London for some big meetings, work related, but yeah, looking forward to going back. And so I'll be tuning in from Dubai again in the next episode.
Right. No, it'll be fascinating. And of course, by next week, I'm sure there'll be some huge developments. You'll be on the ground talking to your sources, and I'll be here in the US talking to officials on the ground. It's another reason why you should subscribe to State of the World. It's our weekly foreign affairs and geopolitical show that we record from around the world. From me in New York and Washington, D.C., and Sally in Dubai and often London. All the global perspectives every week. So hit the subscribe button, follow, like, review, share this with all of your friends. That's how we keep this going. We want to hear from you. Leave your suggestions in the comment section and tell us what we can do better, who you want to hear from, what topics you're dying to learn more about. See you again next week.
Yeah, appreciate the support, guys. See you next week.